What is the greatest duck it, I'll do it myself moment in history? The woman who delivered her own baby by C-section. I guess she has several kids and knew the baby was in distress, but her husband was at the bar. So she took a shot of alcohol and delivered the baby. They all lived, even the husband. English Dr. Edward Jenner noticed that milkmaids who had caught cowpox, a close genetic relative of smallpox with significantly reduced virulence, did not seem to catch smallpox when outbreaks would occur. As a result, he hypothesized to other physicians that infection with cowpox could be used to prevent smallpox, but they didn't buy it and essentially laughed him out of the room. Jenner proceeded to infect his gardener's 8-year-old son with cowpox and, after the boy recovered, exposed him to smallpox repeatedly, effectively demonstrating his initial hypothesis to the initially skeptical medical community. Jenner's On the Origin of the Vaccine Inoculation, wherein he published his results, set the foundation for the first smallpox vaccine and, eventually, the eradication of the disease altogether. Wikipedia passage about the US soldier Audie Murphy at the Colmar Pocket in WWII. The Germans scored a direct hit on an M10 tank destroyer, setting it alight, forcing the crew to abandon it. 81. Murphy ordered his men to retreat to positions in the woods, remaining alone at his post, shooting his M1 carbine and directing artillery fire via his field radio while the Germans aimed fire directly at his position. 82. Murphy mounted the abandoned, burning tank destroyer and began firing its .50 caliber machine gun at the advancing Germans, killing a squad crawling through a ditch towards him. 83. For an hour, Murphy stood on the flaming tank destroyer returning German fire from foot soldiers and advancing tanks, killing or wounding 50 Germans. He sustained a leg wound during his stand, and stopped only after he ran out of ammunition. Murphy rejoined his men, disregarding his own injury, and led them back to repel the Germans. He insisted on remaining with his men while his wounds were treated. 81. He was 19 years old when this occurred. I remember reading that they had to fictionalize some aspects of a movie made about his actions because they thought audiences would not believe he did what he did. I have a personal theory about men who survived doing things like that. If you were on the other side and saw someone exposing themselves to fire so blatantly, would you take the time to reposition and aim at them? Surely someone else is going to hit that very easy target and your distraction will give the enemy an opening. But if everyone thinks like that, suddenly the lunatic in no man's land with a satchel charge clenched in his teeth makes it across. General Vladimir Pikolov didn't want his men exposed to radiation during the Chernobyl disaster, so he personally drove around the perimeter of the power plant to get exact radiation levels and exposing himself to 137 rems. A lot of people think that this was just a part of the show, but this man really made a necessary sacrifice and should be acknowledged as a hero. Didn't Lamborghini start making supercars because the owner tried to buy a Ferrari and they wouldn't sell to him? He thought the clutch was garbage. Met with Enzo Ferrari to complain about the clutch and what he believed could be done to make it better. Enzo dismissed him, saying that he should stick to building tractors. Neil Armstrong going to manual control on the Apollo 11 lunar lander when he saw the computer was steering them towards a rocky landing site. Armstrong also saved Gemini 8 when he took manual control after an RCS malfunction left it rolling, pitching, yawing like crazy and brought it back to a safe attitude to allow re-entry. Definitely wasn't just chance they talked him for Apollo 11. They wanted their best space pilot. I mean, they also sent Buzz Aldrin, pretty much the only person on Earth at the time who understood orbital mechanics on a mathematical and seat of your pants level simultaneously. Famous writer Roald Dahl, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the BFG, James and the Giant Peach etc. developed and patented a surgical device to treat children with traumatic brain injuries. Dahl had no medical training, he just did it. Dahl's 4-year-old son was injured in a car accident and developed dangerous pressure on his brain due to swelling. Surgeons installed a shunt in Dahl's son's skull to drain fluid and relieve pressure, but it kept clogging. There was no better solution on the market, so Dahl worked with a toy maker to design a new shunt that drained fluid without clogging. Dahl was able to patent the design and it was subsequently used to treat thousands of children. the man who invented the automatic switchboard. Switchboards used to require a person to physically move a cable to connect the call. Did so because his funeral home wasn't getting any customers. The lady operating the switchboard was the wife of his rival and was redirecting the calls to her husband. Instead of complaining to the phone company, which would have probably gotten her fired if they found sufficient evidence, he took matters into his own hands and made her entire job obsolete. The lady who got a law degree so she could work on getting her brother acquitted of a murder he was falsely imprisoned for. Shuji Nakamura inventing the blue lead. Basically, making the blue lead was a hard problem, and only having red and green means we couldn't have the full spectrum of colors like we have for TVs today. Nakamura was tasked with this research and through the journey, had people dismiss him for not having a PhD at the time, and outing him for pursuing a different method of lead manufacturing, which eventually did lead to success. He was also ordered to stop working on the problem by his company but did it anyway. The linked Veritasium video explains it all perfectly and is worth the watch if you have the time. Barry Marshall. This dude wanted to prove his theory of how Helicobacter pylori causes peptic ulcers, and his findings were laughed off by the medical community. So, he ingested the bacteria and went through hell for 10 days to prove his theory. His work eventually got him a Nobel Prize. More details on the story. In a similar vein, Werner Fossmann was the first person ever to perform a right heart catheterization in the late 1920s, if I recall correctly. He couldn't get approval from his board to perform the procedure on a patient, so he did it to himself. He waited until after hours so that no one would be around to stop him except the nurse who was helping him. He inserted the catheter into his arm, got it into his heart, and then got up off the table, walked down to radiology to take an X-ray that proved what he'd done, then walked back to his office and took it out. Separately, Leonid Rogozov, a Soviet surgeon stationed in an Antarctic base over the winter of 1961 to 1962. He felt sick, realized he was coming down with appendicitis. ABD further realized that he needed an emergency appendectomy. Unfortunately, he was the only surgeon at the base and the next time anyone was coming from the outside world was a year away. So, realizing what he had to do, he got on the operating table, and I'll let the BBC tell you the rest of the story. Genuinely, it's one of the most incredible tales of perseverance I've ever heard. Benedict Arnold. Horatio Gates was useless at the Battle of Saratoga, and the two men hated each other. Halfway through the battle, Gates relieved Arnold of his command. Seeing that the American counterattack was stalled, Arnold rode out and rallied the troops from the front, saving the day and directly leading to the British surrender. In the process, he was shot in his left leg, which was then crushed as his horse was also shot out from under him. When Gates' messenger finally arrived to order him to return back to headquarters, Arnold had to be carried back in a litter. The animosity between Gates and Arnold caused Gates to refuse to acknowledge that Arnold had participated in the battle at all. Gates was more astute politically, and the Continental Congress sided with Gates, which was a major contributory factor in Arnold's later treason. Meanwhile, Gates was given command of the Southern Army, led it to great failure, and was removed. After the war, Arnold allegedly asked what would happen if he returned to the US. He was told they would build a monument to his left leg and hang the rest of him. For those who don't know the story, this was very much a power move on in his part. Previously, kings had been coronated by members of the clergy, but Napoleon felt that this would send the message that he was subservient to the clergy, so instead he had the Pope come to Paris and consecrate him. But instead of placing the crown on Napoleon's head, Pius VII handed Napoleon the crown and then Napoleon crowned himself emperor. Napoleon didn't share the spotlight with anyone. Returning from his campaigns across the Indus River, Alexander the Great was marching towards home, sacking cities along the way, expanding his empire. One of the tribes, the Malay, pulled back into their walled city to concentrate their forces. They were strongly resisting along the walls, but Alexander was in the heart of the battle leading his troops. At one point, Alexander was on the wall, just he and his closest retainers, his shield bearers, and saw an opportunity to enter the city. He jumped from the wall, almost alone amongst the enemy, to press the attack. His troops hadn't advanced as far as he had and weren't able to join him. Seeing his impetuous leap, his men panicked and stormed their ladders so quickly they broke, leaving him alone in an enemy stronghold fighting them off. His troops would eventually join him, but for a time in was Alexander the Great and his shield bearers' backs against a tree holding off the forces of an entire city. I like the story of the Chinese general who was outnumbered in his castle against the enemy. Instead of properly defending said castle, he opened the gates and played the flute atop the wall. The enemy general knew of his famous ambushes, looked at him and decided to withdraw from the castle. Nobody else could pull that off and he did. For some reason I find this absurd strategy hilarious. Genius general, but sadly can't remember his name for the moment. Giuseppe Garibaldi in the 1800s. Wanted his birthplace nice to be in one of the Italian provinces, since he considered himself Italian, but it was in France. Got so fed up he mustered an army, conquered Nice and all of the Italian provinces, effectively creating the unified country of Italy, then handed it over to the king of one province because he didn't want to rule. Retired from the army and sold pasta for a living. Legit one of my favorite guys ever. A bit more complicated than that, he considered himself a citizen of the world and of no sovereign nation. He was born in Savoy, which was ceded to France, and he fought for human rights and independence pretty much anywhere that would have him. He was in Uruguay, Brazil, Argentina, and various other places fighting for oppressed peoples over the course of his life. His fight to oust the landowners that were generally oppressive was financed by Sardinia Piedmont, who was kinda pulling all the strings. Garibaldi never considered himself Italian. Very interesting person to read up on. When Ukraine, after being invaded by Russia, didn't get any help guaranteed by the Budapest Memorandum and had to beg for every single piece of equipment, which experts told them is too advanced for them and needs years of teaching, but managed to deblocade their capital, Kyiv, and other northern towns with not much more than Soviet artillery, a handful of Turkish Bayraktar drones and Javelin NLAW anti-tank weapons, sunk the Black Sea Fleet's flagship with their own system, learned how to use artillery systems from several different countries, established a no-fly zone over controlled territories, started an offensive that deblockaded Kharkiv and liberated Kherson, sunk almost the entire Russian Black Sea Fleet and hit the Black Sea Fleet command post with too hard-to-learn French missiles, learned how to use Western tanks they had to beg for months, learned how to use weighty. The hunter Jim Corbett had more than a few of these. Born in India during colonial times, he had a deep love for the country of his birth, and when he heard villages were having problems with man-eating big cats, he lent his services as a keen shot to protect the local villages. It's reckoned from logs that were kept, that the big cats he slew had killed over 1,200 people altogether. The deadliest of which was the infamous tiger of Champawat. It was a female Bengal tiger that had a documented 436 victim kill count. Corbett eventually found her by following a trail of blood from a 16-year-old girl it had killed and dragged off into the wilderness. The maddest thing is, he went on all of these hunts on foot and alone. Later on in his life he ended up putting his efforts towards conservation. The catalyst for which was that he realized a lot of these man-eaters had damaged teeth and were actually killing the humans out of starvation, as they could not attack their regular prey with tougher hides anymore. The Jim Corbett National Park in India has the highest numbers tigers residing there of any of its national parks.